I mean, I hope people can hear me. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, great. If you can't hear me, then just let me know. Okay, one sec. Alrighty then. Gotta get my apron. So this is sourdough. So I've set up a few things for everyone to see. This is how I learned how to make sourdough. My first ever sourdough loaf I made by just looking up a YouTube video and just following the steps there. So before I begin, there are a few books I might suggest. So this is the primary book. It's called The Perfect Loaf. You can get it on Amazon, and it's a very good recipe book. It does give you all the basics and everything you would need. I found that I've only had success with about 70% of his recipes. But it's a great way to sort of get just a hands-on practical guide for sourdough. The book that I found the most informative is this one. Now, this one's hard to find. It's called Sourdough Baking, a Treatise. I had to order this from Spain, actually. Interestingly, in Spain, you can get it in French or English. Weird. This is a very detailed scientific guide into bread. So actually, I'll kind of learn a lot about the molecular biology of bread making and sourdough baking from this book. This guy, his name is Thomas Teffrey Chambellan. I don't do French. He's actually considered one of the world's foremost experts in sourdough baking. He's got his master's in biology, and you can really tell he has a lot of chemical guides. And so if you're a huge nerd like me, this is a really good book too, but it was kind of pricey. You're looking at like above $100 for this book. And then another very famous book is Tartine Bread. This guy, Chad Robertson, he's considered to have the most famous bakery in the US. It's located in San Francisco, called Tartine Bread. If you like more vibe baking, where you don't want to be exact, but at the same time, you kind of want to get into it, then this is not a bad book either. I found this one harder to follow because if you read this book, you see how exact you have to be, especially when it comes to baking. Okay, so with that being said, these are 3 suggestions. If for anyone who just wants to do a beginner, this is a perfectly good book, The Perfect Loaf. Lots of great recipes, and it'll get you started. Okay, so before you even begin, there are a few things that are absolute essentials, and then I'm going to describe certain things that I use that I find to be extremely helpful as auxiliary use. And if you can't hear me, just I have my phone with me, so just send me a message saying that you can't hear me. So some essentials, obviously, mixing bowl. A scale is absolutely essential. You cannot do sourdough baking if you don't have a scale, because everyone who has failed at sourdough baking, that I've seen, one of the things that they don't do is they don't weigh to within a gram. Like you have to be as precise as you can, because we'll see how being off by 1 or 2 degrees, 1 or 2 grams can actually completely change the entire landscape of your sourdough. Another thing you'll want is a bench scraper. I like to have this plastic bench scraper as well, just literally to help me scoop the dough out of the mixing bowl. And of course, you'll need flour, water, and salt. I'll describe which flours I use for my main recipe when we actually get to the mixing. So with any sourdough, let me just put these aside. Sorry. Okay, so I'm actually going to get 2 of these. If you bear with me for a second. Okay, so in traditional baking, you need something to leaven the bread. Now, that can either be natural, it can be synthetic, or it can be something else. What I mean by synthetic, I mean you can have, baking soda and some acid that will actually, help expand the bread. You could do something more, I don't want to call it synthetic. I don't want to call it artificial either, but, natural baker's yeast, which is great. Obviously, yeast is crucial in bread baking. Or you can have a natural leaven. We call this a sourdough starter. So this is my actual starter. I've had this for over a year now. Talked to Aaron Zweig. He's had his for over 10 years. And every day you're going to be feeding this thing. Now, I'm not going to go over the basics of how to get a sourdough starter because the 3 books I just showed you, they all agree in order to make a sourdough starter, go find someone who has a sourdough starter and ask for some of theirs. That's going to be the easiest way of getting a sourdough starter. I did cultivate this myself, and it took about 2 weeks to do. Looking back on it, pointless. I wish I had just gone to Aaron Zweig or Aaron Zweig or anyone else who bakes sourdough in the community and just ask them for some of their starter, because you can get started right away. And your own home environment, your flour of choice, everything that you do that is in your own environment will actually make your own starter unique. So this is my starter. And what I did about 4 hours ago is so if you have your notebooks ready, I'm going to already start the lesson, but I'll go through it more in detail soon. I took some of this starter, put it into another container, added some flour and water to this other container, and this thing here is called the levain. This is what I'm actually going to be putting into my bowl when we get started. The levain is a ripe version of your sourdough starter. And usually you want to take a splinter of your starter and put it into your levain because you want to maintain your starter throughout. I have now more starter that I can use, and I can now bake with this, and I can use this for later. So actually, after I mix this, since I'm baking twice today, I'll be doing this twice today. I'm actually going to be making another levain, so I'll show you how I get that ready after we're done with the mixing. Okay, so before we even get to mixing, what is a sourdough starter? A sourdough starter is a whole smorgasbord of various different microbes that are utilized in the baking. And this thing here, all the microbes are how sourdough gets its sour flavor. So if you use normal baker's yeast, how does yeast work? Well, you have fermentation, which means that yeasts eat the sugar of whatever the container they're in. It doesn't necessarily even have to be flour, but yeast eat sugar and excrete carbon dioxide and alcohol. So that's just normal baker's yeast. And the genus and species for baker's yeast is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. In a sourdough starter, you not only have yeast, a different strain of yeast, not Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but you also have a whole bunch of lactobacillus bacteria. And that lactobacillus bacteria actually creates a very acidic environment because the lactobacillus bacteria actually eats basically the same sugar, but instead of excreting carbon dioxide, it'll actually excrete various different types of acids, most notably lactic acid, which is something you would find in your yogurt, and acetic acid, which is vinegar, basically. So what normally gives sourdough its sour flavor is that acetic and lactic acid. Those are the two things that are going to give it the sour flavor. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to make sourdough that tastes sour. There are many ways to try to temper the amount of sourness that you see in sourdough. I think my sourdough loaves are not particularly sour. They just taste good. So that's sort of the biochemistry of how a starter works. And this is your actual leaven. So this is what's going to make the bread rise. And it's a very slow rising leaven. We're actually, once we're done doing our primary mixing, we're going to let it sit for about 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours. Okay. So that's your starter. Great. I'm going to put this aside. As I said, if you want to, I'm not really going into how to make a starter. That's its own video. If you want to just get started with baking and you need a starter, please just come. I'd be happy to give you a starter and then how to maintain your starter. And if you want to, go ahead. If you want to, you don't have to do everything daily. What you could do is, feed your starter like that, then put it into your fridge, take it out once a week to do baking. For example, if you want to do Shabbos baking, and then, refresh your starter, put it back in the fridge for the next week. So it's not that difficult to maintain. Okay. So if you have any questions, by the way, please, I have my phone next to me. So please feel free to just write it in the chat. So there are a couple other things that I would suggest you get. In particular, and I'm going to actually bring my laptop with me here. I have a proofing station right here. This is a Broad & Taylor proofing station because temperature control is very important. I don't know if you can see the side here. It's already on right there. It's on at a nice 78 degrees. Temperature control is possibly the most important part of sourdough baking. A change in 1 degree of temperature, if it was 77 degrees versus 78 degrees, would increase the amount of fermentation time by about 40 minutes, literally a 1 degree difference. So you don't need the fermentation station. You can sort of eyeball it, and there are ways to make a nice warm environment for your dough, which I'll explain. But personally, I like to have that. It was about $200 to get that particular proofing station. And that way I could just put it in. I get consistent loaves every time. Just set a timer, and I don't have to worry about different things. Okay, so let's actually get down to baking. Okay, so in order to make my loaf of sourdough, we're going to use water. This is a ripe levain. You can tell it's ripe because it's a little hard to see, but you can see this it rose all the way up to here, and then you can see like a little blurry ring. It means it's starting to fall down again. When it starts to fall down again, that's a sign that it is ready to bake and it's ripe, ready to go. And you don't want to wait too long after that goes down, because then it'll just take longer for your bulk fermentation to occur, and your environment's going to be a lot more acidic. It's just not a good idea. So I have my ripe levain here. I'm going to have my water. Again, you can use any water you want. I've heard you can use tap water. I just don't like to use tap water. I just use the Kirkland water. And then I'm going to use 3 different types of flour for my recipe, the one that everyone seems to like. All-purpose flour, whole wheat flour, and bread flour. The all-purpose flour, I got Kirkland's Costco brand. Whole wheat. Whole wheat is a 1 degree brand. This is the whole wheat brand that I get. You can find in Whole Food. It's a very good flour. And please use good flours, like good organic flours. Don't use garbage. Not a good move. As a matter of fact, the very last chapter of the Sourdough Baking a Treatise, he describes all of the carcinogens and terrible things that are in non-organic flours. I would not use non-organic flours. So Kirkland, the whole wheat flour that I just showed you, which is available at the Whole Foods right here. It's I think $13 for a 5-pound bag. Not cheap, but it's good quality. And then this is just King Arthur's organic bread flour. Okay. So put these aside. So first thing I'm going to do now, if you have your pen and paper at home, and I'll go through the steps at the end again, just verbally, but I'll do the steps right now. So if you're at home, we're going to start with 1,220 grams of water. And I should mention this recipe is for 4 loaves and it scales. So if you want to make 1 loaf, divide everything by 1/4. If you want to make 2 loaves, divide everything by 1/2. If you want to make 8 loaves, multiply everything by 2. But everything scales in that sense. So this is a recipe for 4 loaves. I'm going to put 1,220 grams of water into my bowl. That's 1218. As I said, to within a gram. 1219. One more. There we go. 1220. Perfect. 1220 grams. And here, in case you want to see it, I don't know if you can. 1220 grams. Next, I made this, and I'll explain when I make the levain after we're done with this mixing. I'll explain how I made this, but I'm going to put 450 grams of this into the water, okay? Just get my trusty spatula. We're going to put 450 grams into the water. And this is your leavening agent. So one thing that you can notice, you'll know that it's sort of the levain, which is the French version for leaven, but you'll know that this is ready if when it falls in, it should float. It's called the float test. The reason why is because it should be very airy and not very dense. So let's see where I'm at. 388, 400, 430, 434. Sorry, trying to get it in there. 443. Come on. 445. Oops. 448. As I said, to within a gram. 451. That's perfectly good. Okay. So we're at 451. Okay. So that if you're following along, 1,220 grams of water and 450 grams of this levain. And I'm going to kind of stir it very gently in so that it breaks up, and the water should look very dirty. I mean, there's no other way to put it, but it's all of that yeast and bacteria are being put into the water. Okay. Nice. So if you're sort of looking at it, this is what the water will look like, right? Kind of dirty water, but it's not actually dirty. Obviously, it is just levain in water. And yeah, so I have this together. I'm going to tare my scale again. Now comes the flour. So the flour, I'm actually going to measure it in a different bowl so I don't mess it up. I'm going to put in 1,000 grams of, that's bread flour. I'm going to put in 1,000 grams of all-purpose flour. Yep, that's too much. Okay, that's 1,000 grams of all-purpose flour. I'm just going to dump it in there. I'm going to put in 350 grams of whole wheat flour. $350 grams of whole wheat. And then 546 grams of bread flour. Now, there's a reason why it's kind of a random number. I'll explain as soon as I'm done with it. Okay, so this is 546. Okay. Now, as I said, I will explain why it's the case. You want to make sure that you have the right water to flour ratio. And what I'm going for is the total amount of flour, if you were doing the math, 1,000 grams of all-purpose, 350 grams of whole wheat, 546 grams of bread flour. You want your hydration percentage, meaning the percentage of water that you put in relative to how much flour you have. You want it to be about 65% hydration. You can go higher or lower. It'll make your dough thicker or thinner. I've tried higher. People tell me that they actually don't like the higher hydration level. They like the 65%. So 65%, let me take a step back. If I have 1,896 grams of flour in here, then in total, because we're going to add a little bit more water later, I'm going to have 1,320 grams of water total, because I will add another 100 grams soon. That's 65% of the flour, of the flour's weight will be water. So we say that's 65% hydration. Anyway, even if you don't understand, that's fine. Just follow the recipe to a T. Okay, now I'm going to take my dough whisk. Alternatively, you can just take wet hands and mix and make sure all the dough gets wet. So I'm going to make sure all the dough gets wet. I don't want any dry pieces of dough left. This is one of the harder parts. Actually takes a bit of muscle to do at some point. And don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Oh, I'm always afraid that that's going to happen. When I first started doing it, I would just wet my hands and then just get in there. And you really can't be afraid of the dough. It'll wash off. What can I say? So, all right. So dough's starting to come together. I know you can't really see it, but it's still a little like dry and wet. So we're gonna go. Okay, so while I'm mixing it, let me just mention briefly, and I'll mention it again just for repetition. How did I make the levain? So I had my starter, which I feed every single day because I bake quite a lot. I'm usually making something at least 3, maybe even 4 times a week. So every day, in order to maintain my starter, I toss out everything except for about, 20 grams of starter. and I feed the starter by adding new flour and water. I put in 100 grams of water, 70 grams of all-purpose flour, and 30 grams of rye flour. Now, if you're perceptive, you might notice that I keep about 20 grams of water, 20 grams of old starter, and I feed it with 100 grams of total flour and 100 grams of water. That's a 1:5 ratio. Okay, that's just to upkeep my starter every day. Some people say you should be doing it twice a day. I found that you can get away with doing it, once a day. So once your starter's established and it looks good and everything's going well, to make the levain, 4 hours before I start baking, so that was roughly 5:30 this morning. I could not sleep very well last night. Don't know why. I take 90 grams of starter and I add to it 90 grams of all-purpose flour, 90 grams of wheat flour, and 180 grams of water, which is a 1:2 ratio. Okay, so I mixed this as well as I could. Now I'm literally going to dig in there with my hands. I want to make sure all the flour rather, is wet. And the reason why you want all the flour to be wet is because flour contains a bunch of starches. Specifically, they have these things called six chain sugars. And what the water does is it causes the enzymes in the flour to start actually breaking down those sugars. And you need those sugars for the yeast to feed on. So that's why dry flour, you can leave it out forever. There's no enzymatic activity that's occurring. But once you start adding water, then immediately you're going to start having gluten development. Okay. So everything is now sort of mixed. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now, well, first, see, hands doughy. I'm going to go wash my hands just very briefly. And then I'm going to sort of go back. Again, I find repetition is the best way to learn. So I'm going to go back and sort of explain what it is that I'm doing. Hey, Siri, set a timer for 40 minutes.
40 minutes starting now.
The dough is very thick, so this will take me a few minutes to just wash my hands off. You want to say hi, Leaves?
Hi.
Okay. Let me cover this up and put it away just for now. Covering it up. Let a little air in. I'm going to cover it up and I'm going to put it in that proofing basket and I'll be right back. Okay. So I'm now going to let it sit for 40 minutes. So let's just sort of recap right now. If it takes 40 minutes, then we can go on to the next step. If you're bored of me, that's fine too. This will all be recorded so you can, I'll share the link afterwards. Okay, so steps for sourdough. 1, you have to have a working sourdough starter. And I'm not going to go through the steps of that. It's a process. You can go online. You can order that book. Everyone has their own way of making a starter. My recommendation, I'm happy to share some of my starter. So feel free to come and I'll explain how to maintain it. It takes about 5 minutes a day just for me to maintain it. It's something I do, right when I wake up or right before I go to sleep. Okay, so prior to starting a sourdough, you have to make a schedule of baking. It is one of those things, unfortunately, where you have to make sure that you have the time to do it. You don't have to be actively on top of it. For example, if I wasn't doing this video right now, I'd be doing work from home and, and then in 40 minutes from now, just the next step, which takes 5 more minutes, then 20 minutes from that, the next step, etc. So generally you're going to have a schedule as follows. You have a start time where you start the levain. The levain is fed in a 1:2:2 ratio. What that means is whatever ratio of starter you put in, there should be twice the amount of flour and twice the amount of water. So the way I made this particular recipe is I put 90 grams of starter into this container, 90 grams into this container, followed by 180 grams of flour. Half of that was whole wheat, half of that was all-purpose, and then 180 grams of water. Stir it up, and as you can see, I put this little rubber band to sort of give you an idea of after I stirred it up, where was the level of the leaven. This is my leaven. So where was the level of the leaven when I first made it? Then I actually took this and I put it in my proofing basket. Again, temperature is so important. I put it in my proofing basket at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And it takes about 4 hours for it to rise all the way up here, right? When I first took it out, you can even see, if you look closely, like it's nice and clear up here. You can tell that it rose all the way up here and then started to dip down a little bit. When that happens, that's when you know it's ready. Okay, so once it's ready, which is about 4 hours after you start making the leaven, what we just did is we started mixing everything together. This step is called the autolyse step. What you do is you add 1,220 grams of water. You add 450 grams of this, which in this case was the whole thing. I added the 1,000 grams of all-purpose flour, 350 grams of whole wheat, 546 grams of bread flour. And I mix it all together. I have this little dough whisk that I used, but there's nothing wrong with just wetting your hands a bit and mixing it with your hands. You can start with like a motion where you sort of do this until things start to get wet. And then you really, try not to knead it too much, because kneading starts gluten development, which we want to hold off on that a little bit. So this initial mixing is called the autolyse step. So what is the autolyse step? Well, we're already going to start having the water break down all those sugars in the flour, and we want the yeast to already start working up. Now, we do that, it'll make mixing later a little easier, and B, we want to get those sugars as fine as possible for the yeast to eat and start the fermentation activity. So this autolyse period, normally after I do this mixing, if you heard, I asked Siri to set a timer for 40 minutes. So after 40 minutes, I'm going to come back and then I'm going to add my salt and the rest of my water, 100 grams more water and 36 grams of salt. I'm going to mix that all in, and then we're going to really want to mix the dough well to start gluten development. The way gluten development works is in dough, you have these two proteins, gliadin and glutenine, and you need oxygen to actually link those two together to make gluten. And the whole purpose of gluten development is to get a whole network of gluten together so that when the yeast excrete the carbon dioxide, you get these little air pockets on the side of the gluten. And you'll see what it looks like when we take it out of the bowl. It actually looks really cool. It's like a whole spider web that kind of looks like it. But that's all the gluten that's linking together. And it traps all that air. And that's a good thing. We really want that to happen, because when we will bake it tomorrow, that air will expand and irreversibly transform the structure of the dough into what you see as bread. That's the ultimate goal. So this step that we just finished, if we go back, is autolyse. Again, the additions for the autolyse is 450 grams of leaven, 1,220 grams of water, mix those together. Then add 1,000 grams all-purpose flour, 350 grams of whole wheat, and 546 of bread flour. Get it all wet. Make sure there are no dry parts to it. Cover it, and then I put it back on my proofing basket at 78 degrees. If you don't have a proofing basket, another option that I've heard is you can put it inside of your oven with the oven light on. It gets it a nice warm environment, but you don't want it to be too hot. You don't want it to be too cold, because you want optimal microbial development at a good temperature. So generally, bakers I've read and watched and seen anywhere between 75 and 78 degrees. I like to do 78 degrees because who has the time, right? Right. So once this auto lease step is finished, which my, did I get messages from? No, that's Ring. Which is in about half hour, we'll come back and we'll do part 2, and I'll let you know when that is. And actually, I'll probably come back about 10 minutes early to show you how I prepare the leaven. Let me just wash this out. And then I need to prepare leaven for the second batch that I'm going to do, because I normally make 8 loaves. So this is only good for 4 loaves. So I bake all day on Thursdays, essentially. I don't know how I'm going to do it when I start St. Jude, but we'll figure it out, right? Anyway, I'll see you all in about 20 minutes, okay?